to our panelists. That was a fascinating discussion. We're now just about to start our final plenary session of the day. Could I ask? Final plenary session of the day. This is the policy session. I'm delighted we have an excellent panel. Last hour of the day. Thank you all for staying. You will be rewarded, no doubt. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our moderator, who is Adrienne Carter. She's the international business editor of the International New York Times, who, as you know, are our media partner for this event, and she will introduce our speakers. At the end of this, there will be a few moments of closing remarks, and then there will be tea and cakes, more English food in the old library, your final chance to sample the wares that have been made available. So thank you all for staying, and enjoy the next session. Adrienne, over to you.
Thank you. So obviously the Paris Agreement was an ambitious and unprecedented moment in combating climate change, but it was just the first step. So the question is, what comes next? Governments need to ratify, they need to create rules and regulations and policies that support these initiatives, and business needs to make climate change commitments central to their strategy. With this panel, we've brought together both sides of the question and the debate, government policymakers and business leaders, to help us think about what comes next and how government policies can help further our business goals, and about that symbiotic relationship. So with us, we have Gérard Mastrier, the chairman of Paris Europlace and the chairman of ENGIE. We have Sharon Dijksma, the Minister for Infrastructure and Environment for the Government of the Netherlands. We have Paul Bakker, the president of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and we have Vegard Helgesen, the Minister of Climate and Environment for the Government of Norway. Thank you. So, I think we're going to start with you, Gérard. You know, one thing that has been very kind of crucial here is really the finance side of things. And Paris has been sort of kind of leading that sort of nascent charge around the financial support for climate change. What do you see here? What do you want to further? What do you think has to come next?
Yes, first of all, I would like to underline how important was the change in the mood, in the behavior of the financial community. This happened mainly last year. We have seen during, especially the business dialogue that have been asked to coordinate discussions between CEOs and ministers, negotiators. We've seen last year really a growing feeling of the importance of the risk that climate change was representing for business, for energy, for industry, but also for finance. And the idea is, in fact, at the end, very simple. The idea is that an ecological catastrophe, if the constraints of the climate change would not be taken into consideration, would become an economic and financial catastrophe. And during last year, we had organized in Paris the Finance Climate Day at Paris Europlace with Caisse des Dépôts and the European Investment Bank, with more than 1,000 people, the whole financial community. And it was the occasion for AXA, Caisse des Dépôts, the investment fund, pension funds, BlackRock, Fidelity, to take commitments. And they took commitments in order to reduce their own CO2 exposure, carbon footprint. And also they took decisions, for example, no longer to finance coal projects, coal plants, or even sometimes companies having a percentage of coal activities above a threshold. And this has had an enormous impact on the decisions taken later on by companies, industrial companies, in their investment choices. And so investment is absolutely key, finance is absolutely key. And we've seen also during this recent period of time, development of, I would say, green finance. Green finance. And I consider that Paris particularly has taken decisions in order to improve and accelerate the development of some carbon financing, green finance, green bonds, for example. The Paris Financial Center place is the second largest issuer of green bonds in the world, just close to New York, but the first in Europe. And by the way, my company, ENGIE, has so far issued the largest green bond ever. It was at 2.5 billion euros. And this is a kind of tool which is very, very useful to finance the energy transition, but we need also project finance, because energy transition means lots of renewables, wind, solar projects, some hydro, biomass, but also energy efficiency projects. And for all that, we need special financing tools in order to help companies in their projects to cover the needs of financing. And we have created in Paris a concept which is a Paris Green Financial Center, in order to gather all the know-hows that we have in the Paris Financial Center to help companies to finance their green projects.
Thank you. Sharon, tell us a little bit now, kind of building off the finance area. Carbon pricing obviously is a big central initiative, a big central thing for policymakers to be thinking about. How are you guys thinking about it? You know, where does this fit into your plans?
I think that we look at a multi-approach, so to say. First of all, we really need to get a better emission trade system within the European Union. So the Commission already made some proposals. The Dutch presidency wanted to be a little bit more flexible in order to increase our ambition during the next decades, which obviously is very necessary. So this is one way of really changing the system. We need to change the economical system, and for that carbon needs to be priced with a true price, not with a fake price. I think that that's one of the first key issues. Secondly, we are also involved with the financial sector in the Netherlands, which is rather well developed, I could say, in order to look at their own responsibility and possibilities. Our central bank plays a special role in this. They made a report on the effects of climate policy, and they are working on the long-term goals, what is necessary also for investment concerns, but trust for investors for the future. How can you transform an economy which is heavily depending at the moment still on fossil fuels in order to be a zero emitter somewhere around 2050. And not so long ago we gathered up with the central bank and some other banks in the Netherlands with, for instance, investors in insurance companies and also pension funders. And we have been asking them, what can you do? How can you contribute towards a climate neutral economy? So what can you do in your investment? Not to invest, for instance, in coal anymore. What can you do in order to give renewables a boost? And we have been establishing in the Netherlands a sustainable finance platform of those institutions, and that is a way in which they can also accelerate their own contribution. And I think that is really a good example. And these are all kinds of proposals in which we show that the private sector or non-state actors in the Netherlands are on board together with government in order to fulfill our intended national contribution, which is of course the goal of all of us, for all of us, yeah.
Mr. Rekker, take us through a little bit through the corporate side, and what is the lens that you want to sort of, what is it that you want to see from policymakers at this point?
Sure. So let me first, I know some of you are here to see Paul Polman. And even though I was kindly introduced as Paul Bakker, I'm not. But Paul came out of Africa this morning and must have eaten something terribly bad, so he's unable to join us, and here I am. I apologize. I think the Paris Agreement is a gift to business. It finally gives us the long-term target. It gives us a goal, 2 degrees stretch target of 1.5 degrees. You can translate that into carbon budgets. You know what you need to do to move forward. So I think that's crucial. Obviously, it now needs to be ratified, and that's something that governments need to deliver. But that's kind of out of our control, and you will. I think I've said it yesterday, business is a key implementation partner. And there are 2 important words in that. One is implementation, and the other is partner. So I don't think we want to have a panel where business will ask government, give me this, give me that. It should really be how do we co-create the solutions and the policy environment and the financing structures to get this stuff to scale. Carbon pricing is obviously has been discussed a lot, but my call would be let's get real on this topic. We don't need to talk anymore that we need a carbon price. We all agree. Just give us a number. Yesterday there was an oil and gas CEO who said that $30 or $40 a ton, we will have significant impact in the system. I've heard other people say up to $100 a ton. Anywhere in that range, the number should just be fixed, and let's move on that. I think when we think about implementation, we think in 3 big systems. The energy system obviously needs to transform. The food and land use system is the second one, and the third one is cities. And cities can probably be broken down in infrastructure and in transport as the big subsystems. Yeah. Those are systems, by the way, that were recognized in the new climate economy report. So there's no news. But going forward, when we have meetings here or in the COP or anywhere else, let's talk about these 3 systems and keep the conversation pretty focused. Much of the conversations now have to go into the countries, because NDCs need to be delivered. Businesses are the partners for that delivery. And therefore, I was really intrigued yesterday when Christiana Figueres was here and said there is a world before Paris and a world after Paris. And I think these are distinctly different worlds. We all saw, and Gérard Mestrallet has done a brilliant job in mobilizing the business community. There were, I think, 1,200 mayors in Paris. Many non-state actors took part and helped make the COP21 a success. I don't think that's the formula for COP22 or beyond. We need to fundamentally rethink how we do that. At national level, we need to have conversations. They need to be linked to the global COP. I know in the Netherlands there's a thing called Bring Paris Home. Why doesn't every country have a Bring Paris Home conversation? And we all consolidate it once a year in the COP. I also think, by the way, the requirement of business will change fundamentally. In Paris, it was great if you signed up to one of the initiatives. You know, we did LCTPI, RE100, science-based targets. You mentioned it, lots of stuff that you could be part of to show your commitment of being part of the movement. I would argue going forward, that's not going to be good enough. In 2-3 years from now, every CEO who sits here must be able to say, the strategy of my company is compliant with the Paris Agreement or the science-based targets. 2-3 years later, every annual report of a company that is serious must reflect what is the progress in impact and are we still on track consistent with Paris. So reporting, governance are going to be big parts of success. We all can dream, and I certainly do that occasionally, about how can we redesign the COP process, integrate it with national processes, how can we change the conversation in business to get real, but we must also do one thing, and that's make Marrakesh a success. Yeah. And we probably don't have time to redesign the process before Marrakesh starts. It's going to be hard enough to get it organized properly there, but we cannot give the signal that Marrakesh fails, because that will take a lot of momentum out of what the big success that Paris has been. So whatever we do, all of us, all of you have to come to Marrakesh, make it a step forward after Paris, have conversations on how we redesign the 2 roles of business and government, and then move on after Marrakesh.
Vidar, welcome. You know, Norway has obviously been very big on public-private partnerships, kind of putting the climate change message and putting it through money. You know, Norway pulling out, divesting from coal. How do you see these public-private partnerships? How do you make them work? What needs to happen going forward?
Well, the short answer is we need public-private partnerships at a massively bigger scale than we have today. We need, obviously, post-Paris to have clear and transparent rules for Paris follow-up. We need to do that in each and every government needs to ensure that in their countries, and we need to look at each other to learn. And I think carbon pricing is an incredibly important part of that. But if we are to have bold action at the political level in enough countries to make a difference, the politicians that are sort of on the spot here and that are in some countries facing quite strong reactionary forces, they need to feel confidence also that when they put in place reforms, private capital will follow and will flow in the right direction. And that's where public-private partnerships that are specific, where we have discussions on sectors, in countries, between specific industries and governments on what actions are needed, is really where we need to go forward. We are quite heavily invested in forest and land use through the REDD+ initiative, where we've seen some very promising public-private partnerships, and where, particularly in Brazil, we've seen very good results in reducing deforestation. But if we are to see similar results in countries like Indonesia, for example, we've seen bold statements from politicians. We haven't really seen results on the ground. I think more effective and bigger scale public-private partnerships are really what could unlock that political challenge. And on forests, we're talking about possibly 1/3 of the solution to climate change.
Sure, did you want to jump in a little bit on this topic?
Not necessarily on this topic, but on the topic of the carbon price in Europe, and what you said, Peter, on the fact that there will be pre-Paris Agreement and post-Paris Agreement, and there are two totally different periods. I think that's the case for the carbon price in Europe, because we have a system in Europe, the ETS, cap and trade system, which has been existing for many years. The signal sent by the system was too weak. Yeah. The carbon price was too low. Today, 6 euros per ton. It's too low. Some improvement has been brought in, such as the backloading, the market stability reserve, and nevertheless, the signal is still too low. And that was perhaps acceptable before the Paris Agreement. But today, it's no longer acceptable, because there is an enormous contradiction between all the commitments taken by the governments in Paris, at the COP21 in Paris, with the target to be below 2 degrees, and a signal which remains between 5 and 6 euros per ton. So this system has to be dramatically improved. And Ségolène Royal asked me with Pascal Canfin and Alain Grandjean, an economist, to make proposals to improve the system. We have issued 2 weeks ago a preliminary report to improve the system, considering that the regulations only by the volumes, which is the basis of the cap and trade, is not working sufficiently. And we propose a price corridor with a minimum price every year, increasing over time, and a ceiling, a maximum price, in order to give to the business some predictability and visibility, in order to be able to integrate in the investment decision processes the price signal, we need to have some visibility for the coming 10 years. And so we have suggested this, the price corridor, and in order to have it working, the idea would be that during the auctions, certificate auctions, which take place during the year several times, if the price resulting from the auction will be below the minimum price, the auction is cancelled, and the certificates are put aside. And the system is started again up to the moment where the minimum price is reached. And so this is the system that we propose. It's too early to have any reactions from the other countries, but we are still working, and we will deliver our final report on the 11th of July. But clearly, the basis, the starting point of this reflection is that today there is an enormous contradiction post COP21, post the Paris Agreement, between the commitments taken by all the European countries in Paris and the existing system, which is not working, not sufficiently delivering a good signal.
Can I maybe react? This is just the first reaction, of course. I think that we all agree on the underlying concerns, because I already stated this system is way too weak. And if you look at the internal price, some of the big energy companies are using themselves, they are also way beyond probably your price corridor. So that is exactly my question. How can we get a true price, which is a market price, which accounts also for the right amount of volume? Because what we see now is there is simply an oversupply. There are too many rights, way too many rights, and probably even with the market stability reserve and everything which has been done, we agree that that probably will not be enough on the volume. But I think that if we want to have a real price, that has also got to do something with flexibility in order to set the real price for the future right. And sometimes the market is even faster than the governments are. Actually, most of the times it's the case. So my question would be, how can we build a system which accounts for a true price, which has also some real relevance with what it has to do, bringing down emissions? I mean, that is what we are looking for, of course. And how can we build it in a way in which we are not setting a minimum or maximum price, which is, again, not a true price? So that is something I think that we should look into, and that is good to have the debate. So it's really good to have proposals, I would say, on the table, because it really makes us do what Peter here is asking from us: get the price right. And I think that that is everything we all agree on, but we should make a system which is also possible linked towards other regions or governments. Even what happens now in China is promising. 7 regions already working on a kind of emission trade system. We see that California is busy. We see that Canada now under the nice Prime Minister Trudeau is really making, yay. All the women are really happy now. I can imagine. So we really see that there are some lights, but I agree, if we do not make the effort real, and if we do not set the price right, we were doomed to fail.
Peter, you want?
So, you know, I'm playing Paul Polman, who was rather impatient, as you all know. So I was in the carbon pricing session this afternoon, and it was summarized brilliantly by the moderator by, this discussion will go on and on and on. And that's precisely the point. I mean, carbon pricing, 2 years ago I was in a meeting where people say carbon pricing is politically dead. Last year the politicians, you know, Girard and myself, we've been involved in the CEO dialogue. The politicians were surprised by the unanimous call from business for a price on carbon. This year, Minister Madame Royale opened this session here, and in her speech, I stopped counting at 10, but the number of times she talked about carbon pricing was over 10. So there is a real momentum.
Yeah.
I think the biggest lever for change in the world today, and nobody will guess it here, is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. It will change corporate governance, it will change the capital markets, and it will put environmental or climate-related risks at the heart of disclosures that companies and asset managers will make.
Yeah.
That task force has gotten 12 months to deliver its report, will go to the FSB, then to the G20, and will turn into law soon thereafter. Why is there no task force for this question that the minister is rightly asking? Let's just have a task force to sort out the carbon pricing system. Because it's now, at least that's my read of it, it's become a generally accepted conversation and part of the solution.
Yeah.
Let's task a serious group of people to get an answer on the table.
Yeah.
And then let's have a conversation at COP22 on how to implement this.
Good idea. Yeah.
Vidar, if we're all in agreement on carbon pricing, how do we take it and make it action? I mean, and beyond, what are the steps? Is it a task force? Is it, what do we have to do?
Well, a task force might be a good idea. I think the ETS should be tightened. Norway is not a member of the European Union, but we're part of the ETS. And as from this coming period, we'll also be part of the effort-sharing decision. It's a sign that you can actually not be a non-member of the EU, but still be a part of a lot of things.
Say that again.
Why did you make that statement?
What are you referring to?
Part of the single market and have free movement of labor and appreciate it, just to make that point. Now, we are also a strong advocate of carbon pricing. We've had carbon pricing in place for 25 years. But we can't, and we need to look at how to take that agenda forward globally. I think maybe we should wait beyond the US election before bringing the topic in there. But we can't wait for that to be globally in place before we're acting. One of the big challenges we're facing now in the energy field is that despite the incredible prospects of renewables, a lot of investment decisions are being made or are about to be made in coal. Yeah. That will have a great lock-in effect for decades to come, potentially disastrous. We need to look at how acutely we can bring MDBs, banks, private sector finance, and some governments together, for example, to look at how we can make alternatives to coal attractive. One of the problems with coal is it comes with an easy to grasp technological solution, it comes with grid connection, it comes with financing, whereas renewables, promising as they may be, are a bit less concrete for political decision makers. Yeah. That's the kind of thing we need to act on now. We can't wait for a carbon price.
So how do you, not everyone has a $900 billion sovereign wealth fund, so how do you get other countries behind in pushing and thinking and moving in that direction?
No, I think we need to build a coalition. Again, public-private partnerships. Yeah. I think the banks are very important. The World Bank has a very strong commitment at the top level. If you come to the country level, I think there is still some business as usual approaches going on around the world. And we need to look at how to incentivize decision makers, be that in the banks or in the governments or in private sector finance, to make the right decisions. If you're a World Bank or another bank country director and you're contributing to locking in coal for decades to come, you should actually be afraid of the career consequences. I'm not sure that's the fact today. We're talking of one specific grave challenge, and that's there are many specific grave challenges that we need to address. That's one of them, where we need quick action in public-private partnerships. And again, we can't wait for a general carbon price to solve that issue.
Maybe it's good to add that at the moment, for instance, in my country, we had 10 coal centers. We already decided to shut down 5. We have an extra 2 now already to investigate whether it's possible to even close them on a short notice. That would remain then 3, which are, if you look at the European level, state of the art and also interesting to use with CCS, which is probably necessary when you would go to even 1.5 on the long term, so you have to have negative emission at that time. But what we also do is, because we are so depending now on fossil fuel and we have to shift towards renewables, that will be for the Netherlands, especially wind energy. I came over here this morning and there were a lot of these nice windmills here in the sea. And we are going to plan to build now the 5 biggest windmill parks at sea in Europe for the next years. But we know that it is only 5% of what in the long term is necessary. So what is necessary is that the European countries, like Belgium, France, the UK and Denmark, for instance, align together with the Netherlands and then look if there is a possibility to make a kind of joint venture, also with a lot of business. And the Minister for Economical Affairs, who is also energy in his portfolio, already discussed this idea with his colleagues. And then we can maybe make the North Sea the biggest windmill park in the world. And these kind of bold plans are really necessary to shift into a new era, and that has to happen fast, because what Christiane Figueres, I was not here yesterday, but what she tells us everywhere is that the biggest decisions to make the deal done in 2050, I'm not sure I'm even there then yet, at that time, I hope so, is to decide within 5 years from now. So that is the main target. We have to decide in the next 5 years in order to influence the future in 2050. So this is some tough decision making, I would say, but we need to do it.
So you guys have committed to 0 coal projects. You guys have committed to 50%, I think, increased capacity in Europe for renewables. What do you need to get there? What do you need to, what do you need from policymakers to be able to achieve that or to move past that?
We need a clear regulation and clear visibility. Nevertheless, we have decided by our own. Our board have decided some very ambitious targets. We've decided to stop all the new coal projects, new coal plants. My company, ENGIE, is the 3rd largest power producer in the world, behind one Chinese and EDF. And coal used to represent 15% of our power generation capacity. We've just closed down 2 big plants, one in UK, in Ruggelé, 1,000 megawatt, and one in Gelderland, in Netherlands. And today it represents only 10%. But we have decided to accelerate considerably our investments in renewables. Hydro, we are one of the largest hydroelectric producers in Brazil, in Europe. Wind, and I would like to say a word on the solar, photovoltaic. We have the conviction that photovoltaic will represent for the whole energy system in the world a true revolution. There is 2 very powerful elements. One is the rapid drop in the cost. You know that if you produce power with wind, it's onshore wind is 70 euros. Gas is 50, coal 40, and in the past, the photovoltaic used to cost 300, 400. But now in France, in the last auctions, it was around 70. In India, we got some auctions at $60. In Peru, 48, and in Mexico, we didn't won, someone else, at 35. 35. And with the flexibility of solar, with the immense reserve of power, which is the sun, which in 4 hours delivers enough power for what is consumed in 1 year on the planet, the growth of solar is fantastic. And you remember perhaps that on the occasion of the COP21 in Paris, in Le Bourget, Mr. Modi from India and François Hollande and Mr. Ban Ki-moon launched the International Solar Alliance, an alliance of governments with the objective to reach 1 terawatt of solar power, which is the equivalent of 1,000 nuclear plants, but in totality solar. And we have created in parallel a kind of public-private partnership, the Terawatt Initiative, which is composed exclusively of private partners, energy group like ours, or partners, manufacturers of solar panels, in order to reach the same target, and in parallel to help the governments to reach their objective of 1 terawatt. So we are convinced that the photovoltaic will bring the most important contribution to the energy transition, to the energy revolution. And we want at ENGIE to be part of that.
Sharon, tell me a little bit about Bring Paris Home and how you infuse that within the Netherlands, and sort of what are the impediments to bringing Paris home on a daily basis?
Yeah. Well, what we try to do is to involve people, non-state stakeholders, citizens, environmental activists, private sector. And when we went to Paris in the train, there were a lot of initiatives from companies who were saying, okay, I would like to align with the Paris Agreement. I want to already show what my strategy is in order to become emission neutral, so to say, in 2050, or what is my target for 2030. And what we are trying to do is to get all this activism, so to say, on a focused way on board. And we want to not only encourage people to take initiative, but we also want to try to cooperate from government point of view with the non-state stakeholders in order to align and make the loop, so to say, closed. So you have the INDC, and we have a great way of working within the Paris Agreement to every 5-year look if we are still on track, if we need to accelerate, etc. That is, I think, one of the best issues within the agreement. This is really good, but we should try to do this the same with, for instance, business and other initiatives which are there, and to see how we can bring them in order to reach our goals. And what you see is that if you focus more, because we have a lot of these meetings also in the Netherlands, and what we try to do is to combine it so that we have focus. So on the 26th of October we will have a national climate congress, so to say. Our Prime Minister will be there to open it, and then all these initiatives, for instance the financial institutions, will be there to discuss what can we do, and to also see on paper, so to say, what is their contribution, because we want not only a lot of talking, we're all very good at that, we also want people to show what they are doing, to act. And then we can see how we are measuring up together in order to be fulfilling those goals. And all kinds of initiatives are welcome. So it's a way of, I would say, open government, but also involvement of society, in which you can be acting much more stronger. Because then the climate policy, and that's my last point on this, a lot of political ideas are actually thrown out over people. So we say here, this is a good idea, deal with it. And that is most of the times, we have seen this very recent, I think, not the best way of working, because you really have to convince people and you have to reach their hearts and minds. So they need to be involved, they need to be active in order to be convinced, because we are not doing this for 2 or 3 years. This has to be a long-term goal for the rest of our lives. So if society is not taking place at the debate and is not involved, is not taken serious, then your politics are not sustainable, so to say.
I mean, this is sort of the perfect, virtuous cycle of consumers feeding companies, feeding politics, feeding governments. I mean, in a lot of ways, this is electric cars in Norway, is sort of that bringing it home to consumers, bringing it home to companies, and bringing it home to the government. I mean, what are the lessons gleaned? I mean, you guys have been incredibly successful in bringing electric cars to Norway in a way that other countries can only think about.
And I think they should think about it and act on it. Actually, I think sun will be extremely important for the power sector. I think we can do away with coal in the power sector, but we need right incentives fast. The big challenge is really transportation, where you are too dependent on fossil fuels. When it comes to light vehicles, I think what Norway has shown is that you can do away with fossil fuels there too. We've just put in place a target of 0 new combustion engine vehicles sold as from 2025. And this year already, indications are that already this year 40% of new cars in Norway are electric or low emission vehicles because of tax incentives, because of access to public transport lanes, which is very popular, and a few other benefits. And what we're now seeing is a change in the European car industry. Frankly, I don't think they have been leaning in very heavily on the European Commission, for example, for progressive climate policies. What they're now seeing is that American and Chinese car producers are moving into electric big time. And if European manufacturers are to keep a pace, they need to go electric. They have just launched interesting initiatives. But because the European markets are fragmented and small, they need incentives. So they're now actually starting to call on governments for electric vehicle incentives. Norway has 1% of the population in Europe. We have 1/3 of electric vehicle sales. So it just demonstrates that incentive structures do work, and we need that. Now, the bigger challenge is heavy-duty vehicles, aviation, and shipping. We've made green shipping because we're quite big on shipping. We've made that a priority. The first fully electrical ferry is operating on the west coast of Norway. We want new procurement of ferries to be 0 or low emission. But the need for electrifying or using hydrogen or biofuels for the heavy-duty vehicle fleet will be big. But I think the scheme we have on vehicles is also triggering more research and more innovation, which therefore more countries should think of it.
Peter?
Well, let me build on this. I was in Davos earlier in the year, and there was a conversation going between a CEO of a car manufacturer and somebody with a scientific background. And the question was, well, we now have the Paris Agreement. What percentage of your sales in 2030 will have to be electric vehicles to be compliant with the ambition of that agreement? The CEO had a great story. His team had done a lot of work, and he said 30%. The scientist laughed and said, well, you have completely misunderstood science. It has to be 100%. And that's my point. You know, today we all have great initiatives. We have leaders like Engie, like the Norwegians, like you bringing it home, but they're all individual initiatives. When are we going to translate the Paris Agreement or science into what does that mean for the car industry? When is your strategy compliant with climate science? And then if you do that for the food sector, the energy sector, the transport sector, then you can say, okay, by 2030, 30%, 100%, whatever the answer is, has to be your strategy. Is your company ready for that, yes or no? And then you're compliant. And then having a strategy is one thing. Then through this task force of climate-related financial disclosures, we can start to measure, are you on track to deliver against that strategy? We can consolidate it, we can present it back in the COP, and then we see which industries are actually building forward. I think in the Western world, I see no reason why that could not just be done. Just embed it, science-based, into the governments, and we will get every company's attention, and it will move fast. One thing I would say, though, and unfortunately this summit is no better, we need many more voices from Asia and from Africa in this conversation. Because it's great to have a third of the electric vehicles running around Norway in Europe, but what are we going to do about China or Africa or India for that matter? And I know there's a few voices out here, so I'm very happy you made the trip all the way. But we need, this meeting next year should be in India or somewhere in Asia or in Africa, I don't mind, but let's have the conversation there as well. If the Netherlands is so good at bringing Paris home, why doesn't the Netherlands organize that in 1 or 2 other countries as well, or help the local government organize it? And why doesn't every Western country do the same as another country? Then we can begin to build solutions together.
Well, actually, the last thing what we do
an
is
announcement?
What we try to do is, for instance, changing the economical system in other countries and enforce on adaptation, which is the second half of the Paris Agreement. We have to do our deal on mitigation, but for a lot of those countries, also the adaptation agenda is real important. So we have a climate trade mission to Indonesia in November, which will be one of the first things we're going to do. We have a lot of programs already, and we are going to speed that up and accelerate on adaptation, also from a point of view from the development cooperation side. And I agree with you on all those non-ETS sectors. I think that is something we should do, we will do within Europe. We have to look at transport. Our buses will be zero emission by 2025, not the cars, but the buses are, and that's really great. And we see at the same time, and I think that that is important, if you look at aviation, one of the biggest tests, even before Marrakesh, will be Montreal, will be the ICAO assembly, where the world will discuss how to deal with aviation and how to deal with pollution. So if we will succeed in September in bringing about a kind of ETS system, then we will have made the first step, and that was one of the steps I regretted that we couldn't yet take in Paris. But we need to take it this September, and I think that the European Union is really pushing on the agenda on this. So we work together, and of course shipping, I agree with my colleague, that will be the next target, and there is still a lot more work even to do, I would say.
Gerard, obviously the key to this is sort of, to make business really adopt it, you either have to be very forward-thinking or it has to be better to your bottom line. Like, how do you blend those two things, and what do you need from policymakers to make sure those two things coexist?
Well, I would like to comment also on the common enthusiasm on electric cars and what you mentioned about buses. And we'll come back to your question. The French, the Paris region and Paris city had decided to be completely green. And the first reaction was to say, well, we need electric buses. And we had suggested another proposal to the institution in charge of the transport, public transport in Paris, which was gas buses, biogas buses, biogas. And finally, after having compared the electric buses and the biogas buses, they choose first biogas. Why? It's cheaper first, and secondly, it has a completely neutral footprint, a carbon footprint, because biogas is produced, it's a biomethane produced by the methanization of waste, urban waste, agricultural waste.
Animal husbandry, yeah.
Yes, and also the fermentation of the sludge from wastewater treatment plants. And so it has a zero footprint, zero emission in all the cycle, but it's an intermediate solution because natural gas does not emit any particles. And you know that the pollution in the cities comes from coal or diesel, and not really CO2. CO2 is responsible for the global warming, not for the urban pollution. And so this is an intermediate solution. And of course, the scientists are describing a 100% electricity system. But the International Energy Agency considers that in the coming 20, 30 years, natural gas and gas will still have a room, especially because natural gas is also the friend of the renewables, because renewables are mostly intermittent. You have wind and solar only during the day or when there is wind, and you need electricity 24 hours a day. And natural gas offers the backup, the complement, with a lot of flexibility. And so it also emits half of the CO2 than compared to coal, 50% less. And by the way, all those transformations will take time because if you consider that 40% of the electricity today in the world is produced by coal, 50% in the emerging world, 50% of the electricity, and the transformation needs enormous amounts of financing. We cannot put in immediately half of the world population in the black, and by the way, that will be the poorest part of the population. So it will take time, and in the meantime, natural gas is a part of the solutions. That's also the conclusion of the International Energy Agency.
Now, your question, I want to add to that, because it's true that business responds either out of a leading position, we've heard examples, because it's good for the bottom line. The bottom line will be changed by carbon pricing, but there is a third lever that governments must not forget to use, and that's corporate governance. Every company simply has to comply with the Paris Agreement or with the science behind that agreement. I mean, why don't we just make that a rule and then see what the transition pathways to that will be? And again, this task force for climate-related financial disclosures is a unique opportunity to have the debate and to see how you work it into the accounting rules or the fiduciary duty definition. If you do that, you all of a sudden will see on a summit like this that it's not, again, Mr. Mestralin and myself talking to the audience, but you get everybody to come, because everybody has to play according to the new set of rules.
I wanted to open it up if there are questions. Anyone? Go ahead. I don't know if there's a thing. I don't know if just speak. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so you can hear me. Two questions. Imtiaz Mardan from Scapal. Two questions, I think they're kind of related. The first question is to Mr. Diomat. You have transformed or trying to transform your company from a pure energy play to a renewable energy play. This is part of your portfolio. Has the capital market been gentle on this move? Because this is an important factor. I mean, as I've seen over the last couple of years, that market does not see it. They don't value it. The company is transforming, and how do you navigate that? And the second thing is to the Vida, and I think this is precisely the question. We have seen that you have divested this year Norway about 50 plus companies from coal. That is a great news, but what's the plan, as Peter mentioned, that those investments to go into Africa and other places that actually need the most? In other words, how do you take that, a negative investment, what I said, you write it off, but how do you then invest in a companies that are going to Africa or other places to promote the let's say, the climate forward. So how do you address those two things?
Let's start with, do you want to repeat the question? Have the capital markets caught up?
No, the capital markets understand completely what is going on in the energy sector, which is, in fact, a triple revolution. This sector has not really been changing for 60 years. And now we have the digital revolution, like every sector. We have the technological revolution in our sector. Let's mention simply the photovoltaic and the batteries. And thirdly, we have a cultural revolution. And the climate change in the minds is really creates a real transformation in the heads of the consumers. And so if you add on those three elements, plus what happened on the wholesale power markets in Europe, in 2008, we were selling electricity at 100 euros per megawatt hour. Today, 25 or 30. So it's obvious that with this drop in wholesale electricity prices divided by 3 or 4, the power generation assets with fixed price, like nuclear, like hydro, but also coal plants and gas plants, have their value has been also divided by 2 or 3. And so we have to anticipate, and we tried to change our strategy more than 3 years ago now, by shifting from the old energy world of centralized energy to the new decentralized, decarbonized, digitalized energy system. And I think that, I'm sure that the market understands that. We've made yesterday an investor day for all the investors. We had 100 investors. And they fully understand that it's true, it's obvious, that the value which has been destroyed in centralized energy by the markets, by the electricity market, will not be recovered immediately. But I'm totally convinced that they understand what has to be done, and that they understand that we have started this very deep transformation.
Vidar, you want to?
Well, the question was on our sovereign wealth fund and its divestment from coal and further plans. I'd like to underline that investment decisions, including divestments in the individual case, are made not by politicians. If you have the world's biggest sovereign wealth fund, what you need to ensure is not to make it a political tool. That would be quite dangerous. But what you can do is, of course, put in place some framework. So we have a set of ethical guidelines for the fund from the inception. Last year, a rule was added politically for divestment from coal, largely. I mean, there was a few qualifications to it because companies can be invested partially in coal, etc. So the fund made this decision to withdraw from a high number of coal companies. I suspect they might have done that anyway because it doesn't make business sense anymore. But that is now part of their investment framework. Going forward, one of the discussions that we've already had in Parliament this spring, but will come back next year, is whether to allow for our sovereign wealth fund to invest in unlisted infrastructure assets. So far, because we have a very conservative and cautious approach, and because of political risk considerations, we haven't opened that avenue, but we have said that this discussion will come back to Parliament a year from now.
We have time for like a couple questions, and then I think we're, go ahead.
I would have a question on the price on carbon. I got confused by Peter Stadtholm asking for a price, a general price on carbon. Paris was a bottom-up approach. Every country's duty is to implement their NDC now. As part of that implementation, I foresee a price on carbon, but it's that price on carbon that's right for that country, and it may not be right for another country. Particularly also because this is not the only measure step. but maybe a basket of different measurements together, and therefore there is even a greater need to adapt. So isn't really the question not what price on carbon do we need, that price globally, but how can we make sure that once a country is ready to implement a price on carbon, it can do so without and protect itself then, for example, in the area of trade, so not asking for one price, but actually a system of having different prices of carbon implemented and then a global trade still working with that system.
Yeah, no, I agree. The likelihood of getting a global price on carbon is politically not very high, and economically may not be the best answer. But what I see at the moment is the conversation on carbon pricing is moving and has moved a long way, as I said, in the last 2 years. But now we really need to get concrete. And if concrete means different price levels in different countries or different markets, that's fine. I'm not suggesting to know the answer to that, but we kind of get spinning the wheels now, and yeah, we need a price on carbon, we need a price on carbon. But at the same time, if you ask any business person, I don't know if you were in the room when the Total CEO was here yesterday, the man got asked the question, well, what does the price need to be to move from one system to the next? He said, well, $30 to $40. Well, that's concrete. And maybe if he has an operation in India or in Africa, he would have given a different answer. But let's make sure that we ask these questions, that we see the transformation that we want to achieve, and then put the price against it. And I accept that a global price may not be, certainly politically, I don't think it's feasible, nor economically it may be the answer that we need.
Sure.
Yes, I consider that it's absolutely impossible to imagine to have one single price all over the world. And the priority today is not to try to have the same price in all the countries having a system, is to extend the scope and the geographical scope of countries putting in place a carbon price system. Today, only 12% of the emissions are covered by carbon pricing systems. And in the carbon pricing leadership coalition, which gathered in Washington 2 months ago, the objective was to reach 25% of the total emissions covered by carbon pricing system in 2020, and 50% of the world emission covered in 2030. And so I think that the first target should be to extend the geographical areas covered by some systems, and later on to create interconnections, interrelations between the systems. What is interesting is between Quebec and California, they are far from each other, and they organize the auctions of carbon exactly at the same time, and then so at the same price, and that's very interesting. So first, extending the scope, afterwards trying to have some interconnection in order to see the carbon price to converge. And that will be the case in China. They have today 7 markets.
Yeah.
Next year, 1 market. And we will see the convergence.
Okay, I just want to thank everybody, have them give us one last maybe priority that you guys have that we should be thinking about, or your own personal priority for the next 1 year, 5 years. Gerard?
Carbon pricing, extending to 25% of the world.
Sharon?
I would agree. I think carbon pricing will be a game changer. We also have still to ratify the Paris Agreement. That is, I think, a duty for governments. And then we have to act on our national determined contributions. So we have to make the energy transformation really in a few years' time, I think. So we need to make some big steps in decision making in the next 5 years.
Peter?
Only one? Well, then I'll pick the short-term one. I think this summit here has shown incredible business engagement again. for the second year running, but we must not forget to come to Marrakesh to help the champions make the COP22 build on the success of Paris, to not think because there is a Paris Agreement we don't have to show up anymore. We really have to continue to be part of this movement, and then we can redesign the process thereafter.
You know?
If the world is to succeed in getting well below 2 degrees and towards 1.5, we need to do far more to stop deforestation. We have a natural carbon capture and sequestration system. If forests had been invented by men, they would have Nobel Prizes all over. It's a genial system. We just need to ensure that we keep it. And for that to happen, we need far more private investment in land and better agricultural systems, agricultural productivity, better land use. That's absolutely instrumental. And it's very difficult to get that from the private sector. And in this context, I would like to say that is a key priority. And then, of course, I can't not say that Norway deposited our instruments of ratification of the Paris Agreement in New York last week as the first industrialized country.
Well done.
So thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Bruce,